Right, good morning, RDP.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, everyone.
Pleased to finally meet you. We have read a lot of your works online. So, like I said, it's an honor to have you here. Okay.
Likewise, it's such a great honor. I've always followed up on this program in the previous years as well. And it's such a great platform to share this platform with one of the most reputed Mizo literary figures. So it's such a great honor and quite nerve-wracking, but it's a great honor.
Okay. So we'll start with some fairly simple questions. Okay, can you tell us something about your childhood experiences which led you to writing poetry?
Yes. One thing is, one of the most common questions that I've always received is that whether there's a literary figure in my family from whom I have got the inspiration from. But one thing is, I didn't come from a line of educated people, and I didn't have that kind of influence, that literary influence growing up.
Hello. So growing up, I've never had that kind of literary influence from my close relatives sort of family. But one thing is, my introduction to literature was very academic. So in school, we have the Mizo subject, the English subject. For me, that's how I fell in love with literature. And since I was very young, even before I could properly speak English, even when my English was very broken, I've always critically experienced with both the Mizo and both the English. So, and so I think that's my early experience with writing, and I've always made a big deal out of art. I've always been very curious about what I can do with art, and in art form, whether it's drawing, painting, or words. And so it's that child's curiosity that's been leading me out to this platform as well, I say.
Okay, thank you. Now let's talk about poetic inspiration. Okay, there are a lot of questions on poetic inspiration. Now in your case, do you have to sit down at a desk and actively force yourself into the mood, or is it something which can hit you anytime and then you grab a pen and paper?
Yes, another very common question. And I've always find it very difficult to form a proper answer for this one, a simple answer for this one. But I have written so much, so often, and if you have written as much as I have, I'd say it's not, at this point, it's no longer about what inspires me, because at this point it has become a habit, and I've written almost every day for the past 7 years. So if I write only when I feel inspired, I would have produced 2 poetry books, and I would have around 1,000 posts on my Instagram account. So I think I've always been very observant about my environment, and I've always sourced my materials from whatever is happening around me. So I took that as an inspiration. And one thing is, if you follow my Instagram account, you might have seen my recent post. That is, I have notes on my Instagram, on my phone. And whatever words or phrase that comes to my mind, I always put it down. And I don't turn it into poetry instantly. So I used to come back after maybe 1 week, 1 month, even years. For example, there was a phrase, Fire in March. I've actually finished a poem about this, and it was 2023 March, and there was a burning of the farm, so you could see it from the distance, and so the phrase Fire in March was stuck in my head. So I kept that for a while, and after around 1 year, around this year March, I revised that poem, and then I finished the poem. So I think that's how it works. Again, we can quote Wordsworth. It's the spontaneous overflow of feeling, but it has to be recollected in tranquility. You have to become more sober. You have to collect another complementary materials. poetry sẽ chẳng hạn dỗ là cái này rồi thì khá là dễ đọc dùng.
Okay, thank you. So in other words, it's not something which will hit you. It's something you have to actively work towards. You have to.
Yes.
Right. I hope the students are listening. Even for poetry, you actually need to actively involve yourself. Okay. Anyway, so that was a good hidden message for our students.
Yes.
Hopefully.
And if you wait for when you are inspired, if you write only when you're inspired, you will produce very little work. Just write. Your writing does not have to be good. I have written a lot of poems, but I have written a lot of words that I don't want to reread myself. Thôi ra chẳng đọc tất các produce các hệ soạn ra lên chạy ra nằm tổ lợi để các chạy nằm tổ tổ nên là tấm tắc ở bên như so bằng soạn practice nó chẳng biết tu giả đọc khá thì biếtว่าso bằng soạn so I would ask you to like simply focus on like consistently writing instead of being very careful, being very cautious about how it turned out.
Right. So you mentioned right now about there are some poems which you feel are not worth publishing. Okay, but you see the thing is what the author feels and how the poem is actually received may be very different. I mean, speaking in another context, like this poem Hotel California by the Eagles. The Eagles had actually shelved that. They almost didn't include it in the album because they thought it wasn't good enough, but then the rest is history, as you know. So perhaps is there a plan to get all those poems which you feel aren't good enough and then publish it under a volume and then I'm just giving you an idea.
Very encouraging.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next question is about your choice of language. As we already know, you're proficient in both English and Mizo. So why choose to write in English rather than Mizo?
I think this has a lot to do with the environment that we are exposed to. Because for a person to want to write in a certain language, for a person to feel compelled to write in a certain language, he or she has to be thoroughly exposed to that language. She has to have a certain command of that language, whether it starts out good or not, and he or she has to have certain idea about the culture as well. So for me, I didn't start out with English. I started out with Mizo. I started writing around, I think, class 4, 5, when we used to write essay in our Mizo subject. But even then, I still creatively experiment with the English language. And I think the transition well into my high school as well, English was not the dominant form of my writing. I think the transition happened around when I entered class 11. I opted for science, PCMB, and Mizo was dropped from my syllabus at that point. So the chance or the opportunity for me to practice Mizo writing was narrowed down because we don't really use Mizo except for like texting at this point or the occasional journal entry and verbal communication. So I think the transition happened around that time, and after I passed out class 12, I switched to literature, from science to literature. It was a big risk at that time. And so my environment in general and as an academy become very English, very literature, very English oriented. So naturally, English simply become the medium of my writing. So it was not a one-strike decision. Like I didn't decide that I will write in English. It comes very naturally. I got familiar with the language. I really fell in love with the language, whatever words I could use, and what I realized what I could do with the words, and what kind of emotion and what kind of impact my words have. And so it was a very natural process for me.
So now let's try a more hands-on approach. Okay, you've written so many poems. Okay, you brought your poetry books. Can you perhaps select one poem for us and read it? And then we can try and discuss the poem.
And I actually brought 2 copies of my Guest of Eden because this one is no longer in print. Secondhand Scars is no longer in print, and I will be donating this to the library so you can have access to the book. I will be reading from my first book. This is titled War. The original title was Supper, but while we were revising the manuscript before the publication, I changed the title to War because I think it gives a more clear context. War, page 123 of Secondhand Scars. Supper is at 7, but my father is not home yet. My brother is turning 18, and my mother needs sleep. It's a beautiful May. You brought my dad home, older and dead, in a uniform. You said war makes peace, but look who I buried in the green hills. It's a strange July. My brother killed a man on empty stomach. That made him a true soldier, they said, but it made my mother cry and sleepless. It's a cold Christmas. On a table for 4 is a meal for 1. My brother is at war, my father is in heaven. My mother is in tears, and supper used to be at 7. So the reason I picked out this poem is because it's one of the very first poems that I wrote, and it almost didn't make it into the selection, but one person read it and she liked it so much that I decided to enter it in the manuscript. And I think I wrote this poem about 7 years ago. So the 20 years version of me wrote this poem, and even today this is one of the poems that I still resonate with. I could not pinpoint the exact moment that I come up with this poem, because I can usually pinpoint like when exactly, in what way the inspiration came. And the reason this poem is very close to my heart is because last year my father passed away, and growing up my parents used to make a big deal out of dinner time, any meal. They said that we have to, whatever happens, we have to sit down on the table, the 4 of us, we have to sit down on the table, and we have to have the meal together. So it's a family tradition that is very close to my heart, that shaped me as a person as well. So I didn't know at the time when I was writing this how like personal this poem is. But as I grew up, I started realizing the reason I might have written this poem, because you might have your own experience of why you cannot sit down as a family, why you cannot have meal together as a family. In this context, it is because of war. The father has died in war, and the brother, turning 18, has to go off to war, has to register in the military. So the mother is grieving, and she cannot eat. So the daughter, or the narrator, the poet, has to sit down and have the meal together. So you might have your own reasons why your family cannot sit down together. So in that way, I think you might find how you can resonate with this poem. So that's it.
Thank you. That's a very powerful message, because the importance of sitting together at meals these days, people have sort of let that go by, because we have, what have you, your Maggi, your YY, and your Zomatos. So everybody does their own thing. But this importance of sitting down, I think it's something that we should not lose. So I guess this poem is very relevant. And I hope it's not autobiographical, because it would suggest your brother is someone we should avoid. The killer. Okay, so anyway, let's move on. And if we have more time towards the end, I guess we can move on to other poems.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So let's talk about your views on poetry. Now, as you know, there are many, many divergent views on poetry, right? Anybody with an opinion will have a different opinion of poetry. Now, the two most definitive views on poetry have been given by the first person you have already mentioned, William Wordsworth. He said, it's a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have T.S. Eliot, who comes and says, it is not the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It is not the expression of emotion. It is an escape from personality. So in this very broad spectrum, where exactly do you stand on your views on poetry?
Yes, I remember that quote by T.S. Eliot. I remember the exact moment when I first stumbled upon that quote, and I still have the book and I still underlined it, because between the two poets, between T.S. Eliot and Wordsworth, I related first with T.S. Eliot. I understood T.S. Eliot first because since I didn't usually write from my own experience, I could make more meaning with what T.S. Eliot was saying. It was kind of an escape for me for a long time, and I agreed with that. But as I have said, when I look at the process of my writing, later on in my writing career, I realized that Wordsworth was very right about the process, because it has to happen in two ways. It has to be, first, it has to be spontaneous, and we cannot, if we neglect that spontaneous feeling, the later sobered recollection process cannot come. So the spontaneous overflow is very important, and you have to follow up with the recollection. So I think it depends on, rather than the specific, whether I relate with specific poets, I think it has more to do with the different phases of my writing. First, I start out understanding and resonating with T.S. Eliot, but now I'm starting to understand Eliot's point of view. So I leave it at that. So.
Okay. No, so it's very good, because at least you have experienced what Eliot was trying to say. Because a lot of poetry these days, and a lot of our students write poetry, which is why I feel qualified to comment. Because the poetry is rather emotional, it's full of sentiment. You know, they just look at the poem and they start crying. So it's that kind of a situation. But I think if we have a broader view of poetry, and we can understand that sometimes it's not just about yourself and your thoughts and your feelings, I guess that will give you a broader canvas to paint on. Would you agree?
Yes, yes. I think this was one of the reasons why I always find it difficult to answer the question, what inspires you? And since I write a lot about love poems and relationship, heartbreaks, people assume that there's a certain person or a certain event that led me to write that, because in general, at the core, poetry is very subjective, poetry is very personal. But one thing is, if you write only from your experience, your view and your perspective would be very narrowed. The horizon within which you can perform the creative exercise will be very narrowed if you focus on the personal. So one way or another, whether you write about a stranger who you do not know, whether you take the experience of your neighbor and write about it, one way or another, poetry will always be personal. The way you interpreted it, the fact that you are the person putting it down in words and putting it down on paper already makes it personal. So don't think that you have to go through something to write about it. That is where the concept, the aspect of empathy and understanding and honesty comes in. When you empathize with a person, when you are very observant, and when you feel for a person, I think that is quite enough for you to translate it into a creative form. So I think I've received from younger poets, from younger writers, I've always received questions about this, because they feel that they have to write from their own experience. But I feel that if I was to write from my own experience, I don't think I would be here. So treat poetry as not only as an personal expression, take poetry as a skill set, like any other skills.
take poetry as something that you can work on, something you can get better at. And yes, as I have said, there is a whole level of creativity that you can unlock simply by being consistent. So at this point, you might not have found your personal style or the point of view from where you want to enter poetry. But if you consistently write and not too focus on what Wordsworth said is poetry or what the older generation has said is poetry. So work at it on your own pace, in your own way.
Okay, so moving on, let's talk about something slightly different for a change. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a creative writing grant,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So you see, why I'm asking you the question is, among our students, there are many poets, people who want to be poets, like we have Lalmal Soma and Ramchuan. They're poets in the making. So can you tell us something about the creative writing grant? How do you apply for it, and how much of monetary value it carries?
The monetary value depends on whether that publishing house is traditional or whether it's big or small. And it's a small grant. The grant that I have is a small grant, and I didn't know about creative grant or research grant up until last year. I didn't know that I could apply for these things because I was not very aware about what fellowship or what grant is available. I'll just share the process of how you could apply for grant. You all have access to Instagram. For me, I make use of Instagram in all ways. You could look up call for submission, call for grant, call for fellowship. You could just type in. And you could apply for residency as well. Residency is not a monetary value, but there are publishing houses like Sangam House and Sandbox, a lot of publishing houses. So they offer residency for about maybe, you can apply once a year. They offer you a place to reside, a place where you can have a writer's retreat and work on your writing. That is residency, and I think that would be the easiest to get out of residency grant fellowship. And grant is, the grant that I have is from Zuban Publishing and Maveri Nadu, and you have to keep track of all the call for submissions so that you can make sure the timeline, the deadline, and you need your sample writing. So they will ask for about 10 poems, or it could be in terms of pages, about 10 pages, 5 pages. So have your writing compiled. Choose the best of your writings, compile it, have it ready, and you could submit it anytime based on the deadline. And what else should I cover?
So I'll ask you a question based on what you've said.
Yes.
You mentioned something about the residency, right?
Yes.
So who pays for it?
It differs. Sometimes we have to pay for our own. There is houses like Himalaya Writing, so for that we have to pay for it ourselves. And I have not done any residency. I have got two, but I've declined due to the timing, the bad timing. And there are houses like, as I have said, Sangam House, where everything will be paid for, including your accommodation, and they will even give you a stipend as well if the house is big enough. So it differs depending the payment. But
So,
it's good to have that on your track, on your resume, because within the writing circle, the houses that provide residency are always very reputed. So it will really look good on your resume. So I hope you look it up and start applying.
Right, so based on what you said, I get the feeling it's a lot like doing your PhD, where you have to submit a report every 6 months.
Yes, kind of, but the duration will not be long. It might only be 2 weeks, 1 month, and in some cases you will be asked to submit the work, the final version of the work that you were working on during the residency, but other times they don't even ask you. So they just want to provide a safe space for you to work on your writing. So for most of us, we might not realize the importance of this residency, but the thing is, there are some people who don't have the kind of privilege at home where they have the freedom to work on their writings. For example, there was a friend, she's queer, and she could not experiment, or she could not engage in the kind of writing that she wants to do at home because her father was very strict. So she didn't want to write anything that her father could find out. So she applied for residency, and she had a safe space to work on her writings without any fear. So it provides not only physical safe space, but psychological space as well.
Okay, so let's move on. I'll begin by a quote. I still remember this quote was from Dr. Vanal Beni Pachuao. Okay, it was during a workshop on translation, and what she said was, when I started translating, before I began, I thought I knew everything, but the more I read up, the more aware I was of how ignorant I was. So in your case, when you study further, you're doing your PhD now, and you know more things, the more you learn. In your case, does it encourage you to write more, or is it does it make you feel inadequate?
Yes, that's a very good question, because I have the experience firsthand. But one thing I would like to put out first is that for me, the academic aspect of writing and creative writing and academic writing have always been very close-knit, because before I become a PhD scholar, before I become a literature student, I was a writer first, whether I was good at the time or not. It was my interest in writing that leads me to take up literature as a subject and to take up PhD course as well. So the two aspects have always gone together for me. Even in my graduation and my post-graduation, I think I didn't really experience a lot of difficulty. I didn't experience any moments where those two writings clash, because the more I write poems, I feel like the more I write the academic writings as well, the more I engage in academic writing as well. But things were a bit different when I entered PhD course, because I think that is inevitable. And I don't know if Ms. Jamie here, I think she might know, because I talked to her about this. In research writing, the way we, not only the terminology, but every line has to back up. I have to see that the line that I've written will be able to, the fact I should be able to rationalize every line. So that is why we have 5 pages of works cited for every research. And not only the terminology, not only the way we construct language, but the way that we think is very different. In research writing, I have to be very rational, I have to be very logical. But in creative writing, I have the full liberty to come up with any sentence. I could use one word as verb, I could use the same word as adjective, noun. So I have the full liberty in how I use a certain language, in how I structure my sentences. But it is the opposite in research writing. So I took a lot of time to adjust to that. So sometimes when I'm working on a paper, I used to uninstall my Instagram, because when I open my Instagram, I will scroll through something and I will see some poems and I will want to write another poem. So I used to uninstall my Instagram if I want to really immerse myself in the academic writing. But as I have said, for me, the two always goes together. And I hope that it always goes together for me. So today I might be sitting here as an author, but the series of events that led me up to this is the fact that I'm a research scholar as well. So I hope that it always goes together. And one thing, it might not be relevant, I'm working on disability studies for my thesis, and so I have to produce research work about 300 pages. But I'm working on another project for the research grant under Suban Publishing. And although that is a research grant, I feel that whatever research paper we write, whatever objective, whatever findings we have on a paper, it always ends up within the academic circle. So I started writing a research paper, I started doing the interviews, I started collecting data, but what I found was that I want this paper, I want what I find in this paper to reach beyond the academic circle. So that's why I changed my research paper to creative writing. So they allowed me to do that. So people might not read your research paper, but if you could turn that research findings into a creative form, more people will read it. So I don't want my research findings to be confined within the academic circle. So I think that's very important. I really want to mediate between these two aspects, the research writing and the creative writing.
Okay. It's interesting that you mentioned Dr. Jamie, because she's a poet herself, a non-published poet, but in case people are wondering, she is a poet. Anyway, like I said, yesterday I was scrolling through some of your poems, and I was struck by the emotional intensity of some of the poems. All right, allow me a moment to try and scroll through some of those poems. Here we are. Okay, this is from October 23rd, 2023. It's about a year ago. Okay. And reading this, like I said, I was struck by the emotion in the poem. The thunder will make a fuss, and the old sea may roar with impatience, but take your time and all of mine. I can wait longer than sadness. I will walk with you longer than grief. And then, even my grave will bear your flowers. That is deep. Okay. So my question is, and it might strike you as personal, so if you want, you can pass on this question. But where does such emotion for this particular poem, where did it come from? Is there a something or a someone which inspired this kind of outburst?
Not someone, but do you know the Mizo song, Rodinpuii fought in Sokrinen? Rodinpuii fought in Sokrinen. So it's a gospel song. So I don't even know the full song. I don't know who sang it, who composed it, but I think it's in Christian Habu. But whenever we sang that song, I was struck by that line, Rodinpuii fought in Sokrinen. So even this was from way I was younger, like how I get fascinated by that line. So I think that always lived with me, and I cannot say there's a specific event or someone that inspired that poem, but I think I was trying to show the emotion that one feel when he or she is waiting for something that she is sure might not come or might not return. So even if nature takes its course for years and years, and even if you use up all your time, that waiting might not stop. And the second poem, Even My Grief Will Bear You Flowers, that's one of my favorite ever line. And it's actually in Guest of Eden. I don't know how I come up with the line, but I wrote it, I think, right before I published this Guest of Eden. So I think it has to do with
waiting, the emotion you feel while you are waiting. So even after death as well. So transgressing all the timeline, all the space, you keep waiting, whether you are sure it will come or not.
It's interesting that you mentioned the inspiration came from a hymnal, because to me it appears a bit say a love. It appears to be a love poem. So.
Yes. One thing is, okay, moving back a bit further, the reason I started writing poetry is because I think I started first with drawing. So I used to draw on this exercise book, and whatever drawings I have, I used to give it captions, like small captions, 1 line, 2 lines captions. And I think that amalgamation of the image and the writings still lived on in my writings today. So that is why I'm very intrigued by the imagery, all this imagery, metaphor. So that's why I like the line that I mentioned, Tuipui in Sogrinen. When I said that, whenever we sing that line, the image of the wave crashing upon the shore is always there in my mind. So the picture is always very clear in my head. So I want to like evoke that image.
Okay. That's very interesting that you mentioned that you were inspired by a hymn, a song, in other words, and then you wrote a poem. So there seems to be this very close nexus between poems and songs.
Yes.
Because as we know right now, even Dr. Vanlal Venepachau is teaching a course in which they learn lyrics of songs, of popular songs as poems.
Yes.
So I think maybe you can consider writing songs, for some singers, and you'll get paid very well, because some of your songs have a very emotional intensity and emotional depth to them, which a lot of modern songs do not have. So it's just a suggestion.
Yes, thank you for that. One thing is, there's one word to describe my knowledge about music that is limited. So I have no knowledge about how it goes. I have no knowledge about A is D, Do is something. So I haven't tried that, but there have been singers who ask for collaboration for songwriting, but I have not tried it. But I think I should give it a go.
You should. I mean, it would catch on really well with all, these days we have all these bleeding hearts, and that would go really well. Anyway, I think we are reaching the end of our allotted time. Okay, so I'll have a last question for you. How profitable, okay, in a monetary sense, we are not talking about emotional reward, in a monetary sense, how profitable is writing poetry? Can you take it up full time as a profession? Do you think it will pay?
No. As my simple answer would be no. In the Mizo community, because the publishing process, this is not, I don't publish under traditional publishing. Traditional publishing is when you publish books under Penguin, HarperCollins, Rupa, all those houses are traditional publishing house. But my poetry is self-published, and in the general sense, they don't consider this published book. It is a self-published book. So you have to spend your own money for the process of the publishing or the printing, and after that you have to pay the sellers as well. But when I published my second-hand scars, the thing is, it was even more profitable than I expected, because it sold really fast, it sold really well, and also because there was no intermediate sellers at that time. I published this in 2019, so there were no online sellers at that time. So I have to, everything has to be from my own Instagram account, and we do the delivery ourselves, or our friends help us out. So it was kind of profitable, the first book, but it's different with my second book, because I have to sell it through the online sellers, the book sellers. But as a profession, I don't think, unless you struck a gold mine, or unless you got very lucky, I don't think you can take up writing as a profession.
Okay. So this, as you mentioned, the second-hand scars is out of print.
Yes.
Okay.
We've reprinted it 4 times. So it has sold over 3,000 copies. So it has not gone for a reprint.
Okay. So second-hand scars itself alone has sold 3,000 copies.
Yes.
Okay.
And Guest of Eden 1,000 copies.
Okay. So what is the cost of a book, if I may ask?
The
Second-hand
printing?
scars, yeah. No, the actual cost at which people buy it.
In 2019, it was less costly. It was less than 100, I think,
Okay.
around 90. And also it depends, the cost of printing depends on how many books you want to print. So for the first edition, I printed only 500, so it was around 90. And also the owner of Gyeozom, Purona, he's very generous, he's very kind, so he was very supportive in that sense. But I published Guest of Eden in 2021, so the cost has gone up to the same page, the same quality of paper, it has gone up to 100, over 100. So it's increasing very fast.
Okay.
Also, if you want to print 1,000 copies or 2,000 copies at one go, the cost will go lower. But if it's around 500, 1,000 copies, this is 200 pages, so it will be around 90, 100 or above 100.
Okay. So I'm doing a little bit of quick maths here. Okay. We'll average out the cost to 100. You sold 4,000 copies at 100 rupees each, which means you've made quite a bit of money, which means you're paying for lunch after this. Okay. So anyway, I think we are out of time. Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that. I'm really grateful for this opportunity.
Right. And I wish you all the best for your PhD and for your future endeavors as a poet. Okay, thank you. Oh yes, questions from the audience. Are there any questions from the audience? Mizo Trongponat Hevek, yes.
Good morning, Ms. Rodinpuii.
Good morning.
My name is Rodinpuii from 5th semester, Department of English. And first of all, before moving on to my question, I just wanted to say that you are truly amazing, and I have been a fan for the longest time. Even during the time when you never posted pictures of yourself on your Instagram and you remained anonymous, and all we knew was your name is RDP. Even during that time, I had already been an avid reader of your poetry.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted to share, before asking my question, I just wanted to share my favorite work of yours. I especially love your monostage and couplets. One of my favorites is from Secondhand Scars, which says, "Look at me, where do I not love you?" It's such a short and thought-provoking line, and my 15-year-old self was so in awe of this when I first read it, and my 20-year-old self still is. And I love your words, and I am sure I will continue to do so. So my question for you today is, as a writer, a poet, I am sure you have at some point felt your writings are not good enough. Especially when we are studying English literature as an English major, we are exposed to all these wonderful, incredible writers, and that is truly an honor. But at the same time, studying and being exposed to all those incredible writers made us feel insecure about our own writings. Reading poems that are so good is super nice, but sometimes it keeps us into thinking, if this is a poem, then can my own writing be even considered a poem? So how do you deal with self-criticism and insecurity? And also, how did you muster up the courage and decide, oh, I am going to publish a poetry book, I am going to put all these personal poems that I have written out there in the book for anyone to read it. So how did you muster up the courage and decide, I am going to publish a book? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think that question gives me an opening where I can talk about something that I've forgotten about, like the anonymity and the self-criticism. What exactly is poetry? The reason I never posted my my personal self, like my face or what my name is, where I come from, is because there is certain liberty in staying anonymous. When I published my book, Secondhand Scars, not even my neighbors knew about this. My close relatives, around 4 families, knew about this publication. But other than that, I was so embarrassed of my own work. Although I'm very proud of it, I didn't want to show it to the elderly. So I explained it to my parents for days and days because they said that if you publish a book, it should be you should want it to sell well. You should want publicity. Why are you hiding your book? But the thing is, the kind of poetry that we are writing, these 4-line, 5-line poems that didn't deal with such huge concept or social issue, you get very one word I would use is you get very protective of it because you don't want to show it to the generation outside your peers, and that's why I was hiding my writings even after I become a self-published poet. And I think the important thing here is that to find your own style. If I have forced myself to write in a certain style, to write in the way that Wordsworth or Eliot or Donne has written, I would not have written the kind of poems that I have written. I would not have gone through the development, the creative development I have gone through the past 7-8 years. So, if you think that you have found your own style, if you think that this kind of language goes well with the creative flow that is in my head, I think you have to stick with that. Whatever happens or whatever criticism or whatever kind of poems that you are exposed to, I think you have to stick with that. That is, I think, how you can subvert the tradition as well. So, my advice would be, or my take on this would be, to simply believe that what you are doing is right and it will lead to some kind of improvement, although it might not start out good, but it will eventually, it is inevitable that you will find some kind of improvement, some kind of progress if you continually explore and experiment and improve your writing. Thank you for the question.
Anybody else? Yes. Okay, Avi has a question. The mic. He's going to need a mic. Moses, can you please give...
RTE and host for itu tu lagi sama ini tu English ni sama ini Visual pun sama. For the benefit of all of us, Visual dan soalnya. Soalnya kami itu dia acara ini kita nampak kita baik mereka tu bawa ni. Pakatnya tuan Visual tesi kerja siap ni cakap Omar. Masa Visual tongnya siap anda bukan siap ni cakap tak dia. 中间的说你定的，比如说让我按路错，按 penetrate 太阳，比应该当，所以总这样说，我看那种都是多。他把你那做 literature 差异，你呢 determine，因为我来打的，你当这个是个，应该是打做个 deciding factor，你当 literature 做 literature 做这样的，这样的 decide 多大，你。 traditional literary techniques tak ada benda. Hanya yang saya biar luas yang mungkin literature cha akhir ni kau. Zaman bagi ni je.
Apa sesuatu or mizole siapa? Kalau PG MA ke dissertation atau translation ke ini tu. buke silal bunga ziak sisi koi dekha novel ka sapun kaletta khata kathil mu chwa chu enton tur le khabu mizo achanga sapchunga le translate han en me tur kha alo om mang lo ni chu gabatha ti hi alo om kha bo kha hi circulate kha lo ni mang lo ni chu wang chan translation na ma han kan lo nia em think okay kan he dihan chan zo la cha mizo society ya thuzia mi te zinga ya mu te si lo in dai dan na mizo chonga ziak le sap chonga ziak in dai la hi a om ni chu mizo chonga ziak le mizo department hi ka khatte win kan lai sap chonga ziak chu english he any inflow na him like the dialogue between these two departments have to be, I think it has to be mediated. We have to work on this. Eva hina puma fa awe na so mizo jong le sap jonga zia thia mani wang khan min thun zom tu le ang khan ni ta ni so kha mizo thuzia mi ta na awe na chan ya khatyang kha kan mo kho bin ka sha khatyang mizo jong kan zia ke mo sap jong kan zia ke mo le abik ta ke mizo jong zia tu te tan mizo thuzia ki tan kan publish atam ni so mizo publishing board on boka kha khan kan le kan man te an tum ke bok ta kha no mam te pon sha ila aman kha an tum le kan so hemi wa yan le kha bu mizo chonga zia ki publish atam le tu kan so ma se audience abik takin no mang zo te a yan a theng thui le no ni so chu ba ka mizo zia ka ni chan mizo ba ki nan chha the don na ba chu ba nge le ko pucha tak no ve ngai no lu tu te hi midang jeff love letter te kha han chha yan nam tak chha ta yan ka i chi na ni chu khami chang ni lo ve tak le kan history book te theng pon ma se kha mizo chonga zia ve kan ni a khami hemi border va chwak tu chuan kan man ruwa chabe chu tu na chuan translation ania kami ta kha department pani chan ko pa ngai na mizo department le sab english department chan ko pa ngai na achan su til poimo ka ti de kan soilan du bok su hi culture kan korean culture te ti ne ka sha an le khabu ka cha chang ten an movie kan ena chang ten engtin African culture ka sha the Alice Walker chang Toni Morrison chang engtin mizo history ka sha history book ka cha her la kon JFL le khabu ka cha the document le khabu ka cha the an fiction an thu thwa chang khan history ka la sha ta ni so literature koi mo na ni mi in mizo history hi mizo culture hi cultural text achangin mo historical text achangin aron sia kher lo the achan chu zirni kan ni lo chon khatia le khabu kha kan char chin lo ni chu engi kan char chin thon thu the stories we tell the fiction we write so wa chuan hemi kan thon thu ja te kan le khabu ja te hi apoi mo sia historical text ani tel ti sha in mizo chong zo lo in sap chong mani kan le the lo ni pen mi dang chor in collaborate chan ko pa mizoram pona ke swata le khabu ni tam se a kha ka chana ni se ka ngai poi mo em ko ka ni literature poi mo na historical text ani tel cultural side ani tel ti kha sheteli la chuan zo na pani na engi literature tra determine to literature determine to su ka ngai ta na chuan machine zia rang po chuak the thil kan han zia ka mi pakhat talin a ka she thia me emo hemi wang han ka in sha thiam pha emo hemi izia na chan hi ka ron she thia me nang ma ha ka ron sha thiam pha at ni chuan kha literature ka inform po ni se midang poetry emo ni po ni se technique atelemo technique atelemo po ni se kha literature tra chuan ka mai chuan kami technique tel lo in zia mo ka khang zi han ka del thon ka sha ka chan na to khamo ka sai dan ja so da so ma so class 11 class 12 English text the third level na sha the third level text ka ta khan thu mal pa khata o man chu figure the fair ti ka underline na athan chu ari kha moi ka til tu ka ni chu figure the fair ti kha o ma sha la shim BA ka zero literature student ka ni ka ta khan khari kha alliteration ani ti ka she thiam cha ni chu wang chuan a ong sia kan she lo no poetry moi na le a ro pui na hi kha ta khan no min ka sha a ong sia technique a king kan she lo ni pon a tho da kha adang lam chuang lo ni chu wang chuan technique te lo in bul in chan ani pon in zia chuan a lo the no a ron man thawang chu in she thiam chho thawang kum khat na technique man dan she lo ni pon em technique man tu she lo ni kum na chuan lo the lo chu chong lai lo pon a ron om me yang kha creative flow le creative faculty ma na le a ro pui na chu ni ve ni chu zir buan subject ama zir lo po yan a ron om ve tot le ka sha
my name is Avisha. I'm fifth semester from the English department, and my question is quite direct. So we know that how we ourselves are the harshest critic to our own works, and it's a bit direct. So when you start writing, you usually have the misconception that how long words and convey a lot of meaning when writing poetry. But as we write along, we realize how even the most mundane words can have a dense set of meanings. So my question is, how has your poetry evolved over time, and do you see a significant difference between your early works and your current writing? And this is also a question in the contextual side also.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. I think this is where the debate about poetry writing has always been. How should we write poetry? What words should we use when we write poetry? In terms of the difference between my earlier writing and my later writing, in terms of the context and in terms of the vocabulary, yes, of course, there's been a lot of improvement, but how should I put this? The vocabulary, the words that we use is the sacred ingredient. So that's why we should have the vocabulary pocket, so that the flow of creative thinking in our head could have some sort of articulation anytime. So when I started writing my earlier works, even the difference between Secondhand Scars and Gas of Eden is has a lot to do with the words that I use, because there are a lot of new words, big words in Gas of Eden. But I've never been a believer of what words should be used for poetry writing. And as long as it conveys the meaning, as long as it conveys the message that you want to put out, and if you have the faculty or the creative exercise to arrange the words that you have in such a way that it will make the most meaning, I think your poetry will do well. I think that is where the significance of poetry is. You don't need big words, but you need a lot of words. I can attest to that. You need a lot of words so that the abstract ideas in your head, the blurry concept in your head, could have a physical articulation. So, do I answer your question, or you could repeat again? Then, okay, thank you.
Any other question? Okay, there is a question from here, Zo department side. Okay.
Good morning, Ms. RDP. Good morning, Ms. Rodinpuii from the Department of English Semester. So there is this saying, a quote from Dead Poets Society, and we even imprinted in our department t-shirt. It says, we don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion. So my question to you is that mostly you write about love and life in general. I have read your writings since 2019, and I have been a fan of yours ever since then. So my question to you is that in your life, at any point of life, you know that life cannot always go as we like. Whether it be in life in general or even in our love life. So, is there any point in your life where you have just given up in writing, or have you ever lost your passion for writing, and how do you deal with it?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. If I have to come up with that answer, one thing is I've been very consistent with my writing. But as I have said, there was loss in my family, and I think if you have been following my account and how frequently I post, you will see that in the past 6 months, I have been posting very little, and I think that has a personal reason as well, because of I'm dealing with the grief from last year, and because of that, it's very hard for me to write anything other than about grief, about the loss that I have felt. So, and since it's so personal, I really don't want to put out everything that I have written about the person that I have lost, about my father. So, the past 6 years have been the most decadent in that way. And there would be, it's very natural to go through this period of decadence and to experience a writer's block because of instigated by certain events or certain someone. But what I have learned is that if you sit with that writer's block for a long time, 1 week will turn into 2 weeks, that will turn into months, and it could extend to a long time. So what I practice is that when you feel writer's block, it's okay to force yourself to still write, but don't force yourself to write about a certain thing, or don't force yourself to write a good word. And when you start out writing, this is a general advice to all the creatives. When you start out writing, don't have the final concrete picture of what that poetry or what that painting will look like. So just start out, because the more you write, the more you will find things to write about. The more you leave your creative faculty unused, it will be that way for a long time. So it's okay to go through this period of creative decadence, but you have to pick it up quickly if you want to continuously improve yourself, because otherwise it could go on for a very long time. So my answer would be that. So the reason I've been so inactive during the past 6 months has been because of, yes, personal reason, but that too, I still try to write at least a few lines every other day, because that's how you keep up your creative exercise.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. So regrettably, I will have to cut short the session. And I will now hand over to Dr. Rodinpuii to chair the next round. Thank you.
Thank you so much.